The first residents of what is now the United States likely immigrated from Asia over 30,000 years ago by crossing from present-day Russia into what is now present-day Alaska and then heading south. A migration of humans from Eurasia to the Americas took place via Beringia, a land bridge which formerly connected the two continents, across which you now have the Bering Strait. Falling sea levels due to the last ice age created this Bering Land Bridge that joined Siberia to Alaska, that ice age beginning somewhere between 60,000 to 25,000 years ago. The most recent date by which this migration had taken place was approximately 12,000 years ago, although some archaeologists suggest that this migration could have occurred much earlier and in numerous waves. Still others suggest that these Paleo-Americans could have originated from Aboriginal cultures in Southern and Southeast Asia, much the same way many Pacific islands were originally populated. Researchers base this theory on similarities that have been found in artwork, pottery, and even tools and fishing techniques. Certainly, there is a common belief that the Americas were found long before Christopher Columbus arrived in 1492. Some of the artifacts that survive suggest contact with Africa, ancient Egypt, or even ancient Greece, thousands of years ago. Early Paleo-Americans soon spread throughout the Americas, diversifying into many hundreds of culturally distinct nations and tribes. The spread of maize cultivation from present-day Mexico northward into the American Southwest and beyond supported economic development, settlement, advanced irrigation, and social diversification among societies. Maize, or corn, had allowed the development of much larger communities and societies, increasing the populations of individual villages and contributing to the development of the great empires of Mesoamerica. And many times it wasn't just maize that was grown, as many native societies practiced what is known as Three Sisters farming, growing maize, squash, and beans all in the same space. This technique was practiced for hundreds of years and was taught to colonists when they arrived in North America and elsewhere. Agriculture allowed for the development of large-scale societies, especially in the Middle Americas, in the centuries before Spanish exploration. In this region, three large empires developed: the Maya, the Aztec, and the Inca. The Maya developed in the area that encompasses southeastern Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, and portions of Honduras and El Salvador on the Yucatan Peninsula. They built stone pyramids and elaborate palaces. They had a written language and created elaborate works of art. They had a complex calendar and were an agricultural-based society, although eventually deforestation led to loss of nutrients in the landscape and therefore a loss of farmland. Their culture was at its peak from about 250 to about 900 AD, but declined due to pressures of too large a population, drought, and a civil war. The remains of the Mayan society would later be decimated by attacks from Spanish conquistadors, beginning with Pedro de Alvarado in 1523. The Aztec Empire was formed as a result of many wars that brought many smaller groups under the control of an alliance of three self-governed city-states. They had a massive political economy, an elaborate and complex technology, as well as deep religious and ritual traditions. Their practice of human sacrifice often overshadowed other aspects of their civilization. They ruled what is today central Mexico from 1428 until their defeat by Spanish conquistadors and their native allies, led by Hernán Cortés in 1521. The empire fought the Spanish for a couple of years before the outbreak of a smallpox epidemic, to which the natives had no natural immunities, decimated the population, killing upwards of 50%, with some estimates as high as 90% of the population. The Inca were the third major Mesoamerican empire encountered and eventually defeated by the Spanish. It is believed that they grew to prominence after the 12th century AD, dominating what is today Peru. In 1531, the Incan Empire was actually the largest kingdom on earth. They built an empire on long-standing Andean cultural traditions dating back thousands of years, and incorporated these practices into the Inca religion, their economics, and statecraft. Spanish conquistadors, moving south from Panama, reached the Inca in 1526. After many years of both exploration and skirmishes, Francisco Pizarro, with 180 men, plus some native allies, captured the Sapa Inca, the Inca ruler, in 1532, demanding ransom in gold and silver. Over the course of about 8 months, 16,000 pounds of gold and about twice that of silver were collected. Instead of releasing the Inca ruler, however, Pizarro had him strangled. In North America, the climate finally stabilized about 10,000 years ago, resulting in climatic conditions that are quite similar to today. This would lead to widespread migration and the cultivation of crops, as well as a dramatic rise in population. Between about 8000 BC and 1492, there were numerous and complex events that shaped the development of these North American tribes, their culture, languages, the range that they covered, and even more. These Indian civilizations in North America differed from the farm communities and cities in Central America. They were much more nomadic, as the forests and grasslands were not as hospitable for the cultivation of crops, although some agriculture did exist in most places. North America had many different regions with different climates, different resources that were available, and therefore activities that could be conducted there. The grasslands of the Central Plains gave way to the arid Great Basin, which in turn gave way to the deserts of the Southwest. Across the eastern half of the continent were vast woodlands, and in the far northwest, dense forests with high precipitation existed, almost a temperate rainforest. One of the earliest known groups from around 9200 BC was the Clovis culture, known for the invention of superbly crafted, grooved, or fluted stone projectiles called Clovis points, first found near Clovis, New Mexico in 1932. Clovis points have been found throughout the Americas, and it is believed that the Clovis people hunted big game, notably the mammoth. Following the Clovis culture was the Plano or the Plainview culture. Believed to have emerged sometime after 8500 BC, they were named after the site in Plainview, Texas, where their points were first discovered. They are associated primarily with the southern Great Plains region. It is believed they were largely bison hunters and adopted a mass hunting technique to drive animal herds off cliffs. They're also believed to be the first to use grinding stones to grind seeds and meat. Another example from North America are the ancient Pueblo peoples, called the Anasazi by their longtime enemy, the Navajo. They were located near the Four Corners regions of the present-day United States. Because of the terrain and weather, cliff dwellings were common. The Anasazi were an agricultural society that cultivated cotton and wove cotton fabrics. The early Anasazi were also known as the basket maker people for their extraordinary basket work. And they were also skilled workers in stone and pottery. They constructed elaborate road networks and cliff-dwelling structures. They were avid astronomers and used a solar calendar. But the extremely arid conditions they lived in meant that their greatest source of water was snow, which melted in the spring and traveled down the rivers. And prolonged drought, particularly in the mountains far away where the snow would accumulate, would have made those very rivers run extremely low, perhaps too low for irrigation purposes. It is believed that drought after around 1150 AD, as well as erosion, may have driven them from their cliffside homes. The native peoples of the Great Basin, and especially the Great Plains, tended to be nomadic, following the animals that they depended on for food. This effect would be even more pronounced after the introduction of the horse by Spanish settlers. Nomadic tribes followed the herds of the megafauna of the period, isolating old, weak, or very young animals who tended to lag behind. Bison were generally not actively hunted, at least not the prime members of the herd, until after the introduction of the horse, and many tribes changed their lifestyles due to the opportunities that the horse represented. Some of the modern tribes from this region that retained some aspect of an agricultural tradition include the Osage, Iowa, Pawnee, and the Wichita peoples. Those who became almost fully nomadic equestrian cultures after the introduction of the horse included groups like the Cheyenne, the Comanche, the Crow, the Lakota, the Sioux, and the Blackfoot tribes. Further east beyond the Great Plains, into the eastern woodland cultures of North America, one finds the Mississippian or the mound-building cultures. In the Ohio Valley, the Adena peoples were those who lived along the Ohio River and its tributaries before the development of agriculture. They built hundreds, if not thousands, of mounds for purposes not altogether clear today, but certainly for the purpose of interring their dead leaders. Numerous of these mounds are still found today, like the Great Creek Mound in West Virginia or the Great Serpent Mound in southern Ohio. After the arrival of agriculture to the region, a group known as the Hopewell Cultural Complex spread through the Ohio River drainage area and across the Mississippi and up the Missouri River as far as modern-day Kansas City, northeastern Oklahoma. Also mound builders, the Hopewell Cultural Group is believed to have had some influence on the Great Plains people. In the region known as the Great American Bottom, near where the Ohio, Missouri, and Mississippi rivers run together, this Mississippian cultural group inhabited these river valleys stretching all the way south to the Gulf Coast. These Mississippians' mounds are also quite prevalent, most notably in the ancient city of Cahokia, which flourished from roughly 800 to 1200 AD. Located just across the river from modern-day St. Louis, Cahokia was both a trading center and a flourishing cultural center where numerous mounds were erected over the course of the centuries. It is thought that a sort of high priest or central ruler lived atop the largest mound, known today as Monk's Mound, a square mound that covers an area larger than one of the great pyramids of Egypt in Giza. In excavating numerous of these mounds, archaeologists have found shells from the Gulf Coast, wampum beads from the Northeast, turquoise from the desert Southwest, obsidian from the Northern Rockies, and amulets and other ornaments of copper from the shallow deposits around Lake Superior. In other words, Cahokia was at the heart of a continental trading network, a network into which the Europeans plugged themselves when they arrived in North America. The Eastern Woodlands tribes were composed of three regional groups, the Algonquin, the Iroquoian, and the Muskogean, who were actually the descendants of the Moundbuilders. Each of these had subgroups within them as well. Primarily, they were fishers and hunters, with some rudimentary farming as well. The Iroquois and the Algonquin were quite similar in that both peoples used reed-based longhouses and did a combination of hunting of deer and small game, gathering of wild roots and berries and seeds, fishing, as well as farming by planting various root crops and vegetables, usually grown in or near a village. Groups of up to 300 people were quite common. The Iroquois, they were based in present-day upstate and western New York, and the Algonquins were primarily located in the Quebec region and down the coast. It's the Algonquin that would become heavily involved in the fur trade after contact with the Europeans, particularly trade with the French and the Dutch.